G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Those of you who've been paying attention to my channel will be aware that recently I've posted a series of 3 videos on what I title Highland Hillbilly Pipecrafting. And okay, I confess, the end result turned out so well that I just couldn't resist making a 4th video to show you the Banksia pipe in all its glory. At least I reckon it's glorious, and I made it. And when I think back on it, I reckon this must be pretty close to being about the 50th pipe that I've carved since 1982, so it's in 35 years. And I wasn't always, carving pipes every 5 years or so, but this would be about the 4th time in the last 20 years that I've settled down and decided to have a go at making a bit of a production run of pipes. So I reckon I've acquired sufficient expertise to be permitted to voice my conceit to the effect that this is a particularly nice one-piece hand-carved wooden pipe fashioned from Banksia, which is what they call a commercially extinct timber. Commercially extinct because it's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that it's pretty much rare and protected native species. Nobody's got any plantations of it, therefore there are no sawmills dealing in it, therefore you can't buy it. It is priceless wood. Not really sure where you could go to buy quarter cut milled casuarina sub rosa or black oak either, or yellow box, or even Tuna australis, or ironbark, or any of the other rare timbers which I've been known to fashion pipes from over the years. Now I'm sure I recall telling you that my plan with this, to combat the fact that Banksia is a really soft wood, part 1 is to give it a 3-layer shell of hand rubbed, that's hand rubbed, A, putting it on, and B, hand rubbed with sandpaper between the coats, a shell of 2-part epoxy. So the outside is literally a composite monocoque structure, right? A single shell. And the epoxy has soaked into the wood so that it hardens the wood as well as putting a shiny shell on it. For the inside, to stop the pipe from burning out rapidly, in the time between having the first fire lit inside the pipe and the tars from the products of combustion building up to the point where they start to soak into the wood and get past the inevitable charcoal which would otherwise coat the inside of the fire exposed wood, I hit on the idea of pre-seasoning or pre-treating the lumen, that's the hole up the center of the pipe, pre-treating the lumen with olive oil, so that the olive oil will soak into the wood would attempt to swell, but it won't get too far because it's inside this rigid composite 2-part epoxy monocoque shell. So the stress will slightly build up inside the shell and you wind up with literally a pre-stressed monocoque composite epoxy shell around a commercially extinct, uniquely pretty wooden pipe. And 24 hours after the first bowl full of olive oil, I figure it's probably a good time to make a video showing the second bowl full of oil being applied. Here we go. Bugger, poured it onto the wood. Still, that won't hurt anything. There we go, a full bowl full of oil. And now, well, as it happened, the bloody wind come and knocked it over, so let's try that all again. complete with a spill. There it goes. All right, so as I mentioned, I've been making pipes for 35 years. I've probably made 49 or 50 or 52 or whatever the number is. This is something around the 50th pipe, and I've learned how to make a pretty good job of it. They're so well made that you have to look really, really closely to see the imperfections, which let you know that it's actually handmade. It's a handmade pipe. It's not something that's come out of a factory. Right, bugger the wind. This time, it will flaming well sit upright. As I was saying, the only way to really tell that this was not made in 5 minutes by a semi-trained monkey on an automated machine in a factory somewhere is to pay attention to all the little inaccuracies. The places where, yeah, it's a really bloody good job at making a hand-carved pipe, but it's not exactly precisely totally symmetrical. There are deviations caused by the fact that it was done by hand and by eye. And if you're the sort of person who considers that the deviations away from perfect mathematical bilateral and radial symmetry in a pipe, if you think that those tiny little deviations from what the plan for a perfect pipe would have been if the artisan had been quite competent enough to actually get there, those deviations may make the only difference between a highly artistic hand-carved pipe, a functional sculpture, and a piece of mass-produced landfill, something that somebody makes at a production line in a factory, being paid a hourly stipend to push the button when the machine goes ding. Well, yeah, these are not like that. And people have sometimes said to me, oh, your pipes are really good. I say, yes, they are. How much would you want for one? And I did recently try to frighten somebody off by saying, oh, well, like a 6-inch pipe's going to take about 6 hours of carving. That's a 6-inch pipe, took 6 hours of carving, 6.5 hours. And then it took another hour and a half to get the epoxy shell on it. So I thought I'd frighten them off with a quoting $120. And they said, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. So I'm going to have to make a pipe for that person. But they won't have to pay for it really because, well, not to put too fine a point on it, that person's parents and grandparents have been nice to me for 35 years, 40 years. And I really couldn't sort of repay the many favours they've done for me by stinging their offspring / grandchild $15 an hour to make a pipe. And there we run into another problem. $15 an hour is $10 below the minimum wage in Australia, which is about $24.70 or something. Near enough to $25 that if this pipe was made at minimum wages, then what you'd be looking at is a $200 pipe. Now, sorry, 8 hours at, yeah, 8 hours at $25, $200. So why don't I just set up in business and make pipes? You know, the pension pays me $440 a week. I'd really only have to, you know, make 2 and a bit pipes per week to equal the pension is the way some people look at it. And I thought about that for a while. And then it occurred to me that when you're on the pension, you haven't got to pay registration on your car and you get a 15% off the rates on the land you're living on. And you don't get any concessions with travel and electricity and all sorts of other things that make being on the pension a lot better than that bare $440 a week might sound. And it turned out that if I was to make 1 pipe a week, which is what I am limited to by the fact that 3 days at 2 hours a day at the woodwork bench, and the 4th day I don't do anything because my back and my foot have put in a protest and, you know, sorry, you just got to take the day off. And then there's all the other things that have to be done in my life to make the world go around, you know. there's an aged mother whose garbage tins have to be moved in and out, shopping has to be done, mail has to be collected, firewood has to be carted. A lot of stuff that's got time in my life where it can't be removed from. So yeah, I can make one pipe a week. But when you sell something in Australia, you've got to pay goods and services tax. And then you'd have to pay income tax, which is about a third of what you've earned. So what it boils down to is to get $440 at the end of the week, having sold one pipe, you'd have to charge $800 for the pipe. Right? And here's where we have another problem. The world's highest paid self-taught woodworker is a luthier. And the luthier's name is Greg Smallman, and I'm sure he won't mind me telling this story. A lot of other people know it. He was a cadet pilot working for Qantas back in the days when they did that, when Gough Whitlam was the Prime Minister. That's how long ago it was. He lost his job for buzzing the Qantas beach party in the Qantas aeroplane, Christmas party. And he went back to his shed and he had a guitar nearly finished in there, the first one he'd ever made. And he took that to the Department of Grants. And he showed them the guitar and they gave him enough money to live on for about 5 years to teach himself to make guitars. I think it was equal to about 5 years worth of the dough. And instead of sitting in a shed, renting it in Sydney and making guitars in the back shed, he went and he bought a block of land at Shannon Vale and he built a bark hut and moved his missus there and had a couple of kids. And after a while, the world's best classical guitarist went to his place and paid $2,000 for a guitar. And the price for guitars went up and up and up. And when the guitars were $16,000 and he was making 3 of them a year, he realised that he was making one guitar a year for the tax man. So he contacted his customers and he had a 10-year waiting list at that time, people who'd paid 10% deposit to be on the waiting list because they knew that when they'd been there for 9 years, they could sell the place on the waiting list for twice what it cost them to buy it. He wrote to his customers and he said, newsflash, I'm now only making 2 guitars a year, but they're going to be $24,000 each, not $16,000. You fellas are going to pay my income tax and I'm going to have time to make a sailboat and play with it. Okay, well that was a long time ago, 20 years or so, and his guitars last I heard were $36,000. He makes 2 of them a year, each one takes 1,000 hours. Right, so $36 an hour is the absolute benchmark for the world's best bespoke self-taught woodworker. And if I was to seriously try and be in business selling enough pipes that I could take myself off the disability support pension for being a nut and telling the truth in public places, I would be charging $100 an hour to make one pipe a week, and I wouldn't really want to think about doing it unless I had 50 people line up and pay an $80 deposit, put their name on the waiting list before I marched myself into Centrelink and said, oi, you don't need to give me a pension anymore. I'm going to be a bespoke pipe carver. So in the meantime, here's what happens. Every 5 years or so, I decide to make a new pipe for myself, and in this case one for my daughter. This particular one is for my honorary stepdaughter. Because 5 or 6 years ago, she asked me for a pipe. And I've been such a terribly slack honorary stepmother that it's taken me this long to get around to making another run of pipes so I could slot her in there. So she got the second one. My daughter got the first one. The honorary stepdaughter got the second one. And then the friend of my daughter's who asked for a pipe and was prepared to pay a big amount of money, you know, she'll get one just on account of who she is. And then there's a few other people. Earl Portland in the Excited States, he gets one. David Rice, you obviously don't want a book of poetry. That's why you're not sending me your postal address. You can't get your pipe posted to you unless I know where to mail it, Munchkin. So you send me your address via postcard or leave it in the comment thread under one of my movies and delete it after I tell you that I've written it down. And yeah, Desert File, you deserve a pipe. Okay? And anybody else, look at the previous 3 videos. It's not that bloody hard. If I can do it with a hand drill and some wood rasps that I inherited from my father's father who was a wheelwright, then I'm sure you can learn how to do it. And it doesn't have to look quite as fancy and shiny as this. The fact that you have made it and it works means that you will really, really, really enjoy smoking it. It'll be your own hand-carved wooden pipe. So, anyway, there we see the pre-seasoned bowl full of oil. in the $800 pipe that nobody can afford to pay me to make for them. Isn't that sad? Isn't it sad that nobody can afford to buy the world's best pipe? You just have to be such a good friend that I offer to do it for you for nothing. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.